Hey everybody, it's your pal JR again, and welcome to Assume I'm an Idiot, the show where we take complicated topics and smush them down till even my ignoramus smooth little brain can keep up. I am the idiot.
What an idiot!
And on this podcast, we'll be exploring everything from silly fun facts that everyone should know to bigger, more complicated topics like science, infrastructure, business, nature, and so much more. Broken down without corporate talk or industry speak, so even a complete dullard like me can understand. So crack open a cold beverage and your noggin as we figure out together how things really work, minus the jargon tornado and free of nonsense. Actually, there probably will be just a little nonsense. Today we're talking about a subject that's super important to me, even though I don't have a full grasp of the facts, which kind of sums up my whole life. But first, it's time for Random Stuff You Should Know.
Random stuff you should know.
From the world of business.
Work. Sell. They're all selling and buying.
These are business ideas that seemed idiotic at the time, but turned out to be genius, and I'm going to give you a few in rapid succession. Netflix betting everything on streaming. In the early 2000s, Netflix mailed out DVDs in red envelopes. Most of us remember that. That was their whole business. Then, the company decided to spend huge amounts of money building a streaming service, even though internet speeds were really slow and almost nobody watched video online yet. For reference sake, YouTube didn't really become a big, huge thing until about 2004 or 2005. Blockbuster, the giant of the movie rental world, laughed at the idea. They publicly mocked Netflix and stated on the record that they thought it was a ridiculous business decision. Well, the joke was on them because today Netflix, as you all know, is one of the largest entertainment companies on Earth, and Blockbuster has one store left. It's in Bend, Oregon, for anyone who wants to walk down memory lane. Google giving away its main product for free. In 1999, Larry Page and Sergey Brin tried to sell Google to the search company Excite for $1 million. Excite's CEO turned them down even after they lowered the price to about $750,000. That's because Google's search engine from the very beginning was free. So how could it have any value? At the time, most investors thought that was crazy because they couldn't see how the company would make money, so Larry and Sergey had an idea. Google pioneered an advertising system tied to search results, so every online searcher would be exposed to ads, which was innovative and insanely lucrative. Today, Google's parent company, Alphabet, is worth over $1 trillion. A trillion with a T. Does anyone know what Excite is up to these days? One more. Apple making a phone with no keyboard. In 2007, most smartphones had physical keyboards. BlackBerry, some of you don't even know what that is, dominated business phones, and people believed typing on glass would be clunky and never work. Then, Apple released the iPhone, a phone with a big touchscreen and no keyboard. Most tech experts poo-pooed Apple's design, saying it would flop. Well, we all know what happened. It went on to completely reshape the entire phone industry and made Apple billions in the process. With all three of these examples, the crazy ideas are now seen as brilliant and now copied by pretty much every other company in their categories, but they'll really never catch up. Those kinds of stories always remind me of a line I once read by a famous venture capitalist whose name is escaping me right now. If an idea sounds totally obvious, it's probably too late. Okay, on to the main topic. This subject has intrigued, nay, enraptured me since the first time I ever saw one of these on the road, seemingly a million years ago. And that's electric cars. More specifically, are they truly making a difference to the environment? Can the current power grid support them, or are we just swapping tailpipe emissions for power plant emissions? Let me tell you what prompted this topic in the first place. A few days ago, I was sitting in traffic and my lizard brain was otherwise occupied as I idled in place, and for whatever reason, I started thinking back to the pandemic and how few cars were on the road on the rare occasion that I absolutely had to leave my house for something. LA, where I've lived since 2008, was an absolute ghost town. It was spooky. But one thing that legitimately happened, and it was a news story for weeks, was the ever-present muddy brown smog line in the LA sky was gone. Gone. Nothing but clear blue from the horizon to the heavens. People staying out of their cars had, in just a few weeks, or let's say months, reduced smog to nearly nothing. And that started the wheels turning. So when I finally got home a couple days back, I decided to do a very quick inquiry on what the effect would be if everyone on Earth, every car, truck, plane, ship, motorcycle, scooter, riding mower, go-kart, whatever, everyone stayed off the road, sea, and sky for just 2 days a year. What impact would that have on the environment? Would the same smog-eliminating effect translate on a global scale? It would have to, right? And that's not a big ask. A global holiday twice a year where not a single combustion engine was operating? If nothing else, it's a free day off. Who would argue with it? The answer I got from very reputable sources was not at all what I expected. In fact, it was totally disheartening. And this is combined from a few sources. If every gas-powered vehicle on Earth stayed parked for 2 days a year, we'd avoid about 33 million tons of CO2. That's carbon dioxide for those who have forgotten their high school chemistry. So 33 million tons a year, which is a lot. But against the world's roughly 37.8 billion tons of annual energy-related CO2, it's only about 0.1%. So essentially, a couple of vehicle-free holidays a year would be like chicken soup for the Earth. It couldn't hurt, but it won't help. If I wanted to find one tiny nugget of positivity, those 2 days would improve air quality pretty significantly in the short term, but sadly would be completely reversed as soon as all those vehicles were back in action. If it matters to you, that data came from IPCC, AR6 transport emission data, the International Energy Agency, transport statistics, NASA, and the EPA. So this wasn't some random Wikipedia crap. It was a depressing answer, but it started me thinking about something that I mentioned I have firmly believed in since the first time I ever saw one, and that's electric cars. Based on the not-so-cheery results of my research, is everything I believe about the impact of electric cars on the environment one big delusion? And do people really know the facts and figures behind the proposed impact? Well, I decided to find out, so buckle up, because here's the straight dope. Now, I'll warn you in advance because I have the attention span of a garden grub. I'm going to bounce around a little, but stay with me and hopefully we'll all learn something today. No promises. And with my strong belief in electric cars in mind, I will try my damnedest to be impartial here. Let's quickly start with an important definition. We've all heard the words and generally know it's something bad for the planet, but maybe don't know the actual meaning, and that's greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions are gases released into the air that trap heat in Earth's atmosphere, making the planet warmer. And I want to step aside and say, I don't really want to get into a global warming discussion. This is not a political show, okay? So before you take virtual pen to paper, just ease back the throttle. That said, global warming has little to do with the temperature outside. The warming of the Earth has an effect on all the planet systems that work together and cause changes in global climate patterns. Okay, there's a difference between climate and weather, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Everyone take it easy. Anyway, they're called greenhouse gases because they act like the glass walls of a greenhouse. They let sunlight in, but keep some of the heat from escaping back into space. The main ones are carbon dioxide, CO2, that comes from burning fuels like gasoline, coal, and natural gas. Methane from agriculture. We've all heard about cow farts. We think it's funny, but it isn't. And oil and gas production also produces methane. And nitrous oxide from fertilizers and from other industry. Okay, the idiot version, just to break it down, greenhouse gas emissions are heat-trapping gases stupid humans release into the air that slowly warm the planet. That out of the way, let's get back to business. Let's first start with gas cars. We don't need to get into the birth or development of gas vehicles. Everyone pretty much knows the general story there, and if you don't, there are about 20,000 YouTube videos. However, before we can judge EVs, we need to understand what regular cars do or have done to the environment. And this is according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Transportation as a whole, cars, consumer trucks, commercial trucks, farm equipment, trains, airplanes, ships, etc., account for about 28% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and 23% of global greenhouse gases, making it the single largest source. We'll focus on the U.S. for just a second. Of that transportation slice, light-duty vehicles, that means just cars and small trucks, make up roughly 57%. So passenger vehicles alone, if you do the math, which is my most hated thing in the whole wide world, are responsible for around 16% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, road transport, just cars and small trucks, account for roughly 12 to 15% of CO2 emissions, depending on where the data comes from. That's just carbon dioxide. Gas vehicles also emit nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and more. These all contribute to smog, respiratory illness, and cardiovascular disease. So, traditional internal combustion engines absolutely have environmental and health costs. That part isn't controversial or a guess. It's measured and proven, and facts are facts. Now, for comparison's sake, the plus side of gas cars, even before we get into electric cars, is that mileage concerns are not a huge issue. Gas is readily available due to decades-long established infrastructure. Repair parts and repair shops are readily available, and people can make them their own. They can modify them, make them faster, make them louder, whatever. They're also, on average, far more affordable at the moment. And all of that is big business. It keeps the economy rolling, pun intended. So that was just a quick rundown. That was gas vehicles. Now let's talk about electric and when they really burst onto the scene. And I promise this isn't going to be one giant history lesson, but we need some background. Electric cars, contrary to popular belief, are not some new thing. The first practical electric car was built in the 1880s. Before gasoline engines took over, electric vehicles were actually really popular, more popular than gas or steam engines. They were quiet, they didn't smell like fumes, and they didn't require hand cranking to start the engine. They were also way easier to maintain. They were especially popular with women who thought electric was the perfect option for like short trips around town and stuff. A bunch of famous innovators started to take notice and found ways to improve the technology. Notably, Ferdinand Porsche, the sports car king, who developed an electric car called the P1 in the late 1890s. He also created the first hybrid electric car, gas and electric. Thomas Edison, the famous inventor, thought electric technology was far superior to gas engines and worked to make faster charging and better capacity batteries. And even his pal, Henry Ford, partnered up with Edison to create lower-cost electric options. Ironically, it was Henry Ford himself that put the kibosh on electric vehicles when he introduced the super economical Model T. By 1912, a gasoline car cost only about $650 due to the new mass production techniques, while an electric car averaged about $1,700, thrice the cost. Then once a man named Charles Kettering invented the electric starter and eliminated the need to hand crank a car like a circus clown, that was pretty much the nail in the coffin. Gasoline won, mostly because it was cheaper, oil was abundant, and you could drive farther without waiting hours to recharge. So in a weird way, electric cars aren't a modern discovery. They're a comeback story. There were other attempts through and beyond the early 1900s to repopularize electric vehicles, but they were definitely a niche product at best. There were other surges in interest again due to stuff like the oil shortage in the 70s, etc. I'm not going to go over all of them, but generally people could never get over the charging time, the very limited range at the time was about 40 miles, and the very limited speed usually topping out at about 45 miles an hour. We'll fast forward through the 80s and the 90s, a bunch of advancements, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, through those decades, the economy was booming and people couldn't have cared less about gas prices. And the environmental impact wasn't really known or a thing then. Electric cars really didn't start to regain their footing until late 1997 when the first inklings about greenhouse gas emissions and how cars contributed to them spawned the first mass-produced hybrid in Japan, the Toyota Prius. Actually, before the Prius could be imported to the U.S., Honda made one called the Insight in 1999. That would be the first hybrid electric car sold in America. Then we can fast forward again, and I'm skipping a bunch, but in general, it wasn't until 2006 that Tesla started developing electric cars. They were released in 2010 after they got a massive $400 million+ loan from the Department of Energy, but it wasn't until then that electrics started to really make a legit push. That same year, the Chevy Volt was released, the Nissan Leaf was released, and we were off to the races. No pun intended this time. Okay, so after that little history lesson, let's get back to the topic at hand. Before that tangent, I said that gas cars spew all kinds of crap into the atmosphere, CO2, etc. Now the question becomes, does switching to electric actually fix that or just relocate it? And I'll talk about what that means in a second. Let's go through the pluses of electric vehicles. Okay, let's talk about what EVs clearly do well. Number one is zero tailpipe emissions. Electric cars produce no direct tailpipe emissions. There's no exhaust pipe, no combustion, no gasoline burning. That means less urban air pollution, lower nitrogen oxide levels, reduced particulate pollution in cities, and more. Also, something nobody talks about is the reduced noise pollution, which the older I get, the more important that becomes to me. I've turned into my dad. I just want quiet. Everyone shut it.
Get up! Quiet! There's one thing I hate, and that's noise! I say I hate noise!
The Union of Concerned Scientists and multiple peer-reviewed life cycle analyses showed that even when powered by today's U.S. grid mix, EVs produce significantly fewer lifetime emissions than comparable gas vehicles. On average in the U.S., an EV produces about 50 to 70% fewer lifetime greenhouse gas emissions than a gas car, depending on the region's electricity mix. The electricity mix means, is it man-made electricity? Is it wind, solar, nuclear, hydroelectric? Is it a combination of a bunch of those? That's what the electricity grid mix means. In areas with cleaner grids, more renewable type energies, those emission numbers are even lower. So they're lower than 50 to 70%. Now, interestingly, I would have thought they produce 100% less greenhouse gases than combustion engines, but one, I'm a bona fide moron, and two, that ain't so. They're also very energy efficient. Gasoline engines are wildly inefficient. Only about 20 to 30% of the energy in gasoline actually moves the car. The rest is lost as heat. Electric motors convert about 75 to 90% of electrical energy into motion, and that's a massive efficiency jump. Maintenance. Let's talk about maintenance. EVs have fewer moving parts, no oil changes, spark plugs, timing belts, exhaust systems. Less maintenance means fewer replacement parts and less waste oil. It also means less petroleum-based products in the aftermarket, right? Plastics make up a huge amount of the repair and maintenance items in a car, even just the bottles for engine oil and the packaging for spark plugs, let alone the actual parts. Now, clearly, the manufacturing of electric vehicles uses a lot of plastic and other toxic substances that the earth hates, but once the car is built, that's it, maybe aside from some windshield wipers. So it's got lower long-term resource use. And the one that's near and dear to me, noise. Electric cars are dramatically quieter. That reduces urban noise pollution, which may sound minor, but chronic traffic noise is linked to stuff like stress, sleep disruption, and cardiovascular problems. Whether you believe it or not, that's 100% clinically proven. True story. Now, for the time being, we still have to deal with that very annoying manufactured backup sound. I know why it's there, so people don't get backed over and killed, but the motor doesn't actually make that sound. It's added in later. And my neighborhood sounds like 100 UFOs having a rally on my street. EV industry, please figure out something less agitating. Please, pretty please. Like a small bird chirping or something, but the has to go. Anywho, cities are measurably quieter with more EVs on the road. So far, so good, right? Well, not so fast. There's a minus side because nothing in the world is free, so let's talk about the trade-offs for all those positive things I just said. Probably the biggest is battery production. Lithium-ion batteries, which every electric car uses, and most rechargeable electronics for that matter, require lithium, cobalt, nickel, and other rare earth elements. Mining and processing these materials is energy intensive and can have environmental impacts if not managed responsibly. Battery production creates higher upfront emissions compared to building a gas car. That's the mining process, the vehicles, the machinery, the refining, everything. However, most life cycle analyses, and that sounds big and sciencey, but it just means studying something over time, show that the higher manufacturing emissions are paid back, quote unquote, within 1 to 2 years of driving, depending on location. So after those initial emissions, the EV absolutely crushes it in its lifetime emissions. On top of all that, some of those elements used to make the batteries are really hard to find, or we're running out of them. Another negative is all that electricity has to come from somewhere. EVs don't create emissions, but power plants might, and this is what I meant by relocating the emissions, because man-made power has its own massive emissions problem. And the new electricity requirement to add electric cars into the power mix makes the problem 3 to 5 times as bad. I'll get to that issue in a second. If an EV is charged in a region powered heavily by coal, man-made power, its emissions footprint increases. But here's the important part of that. Even on coal-heavy grids, studies generally show EVs still emit less over their lifetime than gas vehicles because large power plants are more efficient and are more regulated on how they handle their emissions. So as the grids get cleaner over time, EVs automatically get cleaner too. Gas cars do not. All right, let's talk about the power grid demands. The biggest pushback I get from non-believers in adopting electric vehicles is increased demand on an already strained power grid. I don't totally disagree. Widespread EV adoption increases electricity demand. Now, I live in LA. We have rolling brownouts or predetermined power shutoffs throughout the whole summer just to keep up with increased air conditioning demand. So for a city like ours, adding rechargeable cars and trucks in mass numbers could certainly stretch that grid to the breaking point. However, according to the U.S. Department of Energy, even if all passenger vehicles in the U.S. suddenly went electric, total electricity demand would increase by roughly 20 to 25%. Now, that's not nothing. That's significant, but manageable over decades with smart charging and grid upgrades. Actually, I'm kind of throwing grid upgrades out there like it's nothing. It's a monumental task, I get it, but it's manageable over decades. EV charging can also happen off-peak at night, so that smooths out the demand rather than spiking it. And another big one is battery disposal and recycling, okay? Those old batteries have to go somewhere, and they ain't good for old Mother Earth, which is weird when you think about it because everything in it came from the Earth, but the fact remains it's harmful. There's some good news there in that lithium-ion batteries are highly recyclable and new facilities are expanding, but they ain't there yet. The better news is that EV batteries often retain 70 to 80% capacity after vehicle life and can be reused for power grid storage, which is cool. So they don't instantly become landfill bricks. Now, for the record, gas cars aren't off the hook here. Gas cars have batteries too, and they're filled with all kinds of noxious stuff. Regular car battery disposal is a bigger problem because they're far less recyclable. So the majority just get dumped and seep their oozy innards into the earth. So that's a little comparison back and forth here. Okay? Again, trying to be impartial. Are EVs perfect? No. Are they zero impact? Also no. Current power grids and current power plants obviously have their own emissions issues, right? So the idea that, electricity is cleaner than gas, right now that's not true, or it's not 100% true. But the data from life cycle analyses from the International Energy Agency, EPA, MIT Research, and multiple independent studies consistently shows electric vehicles reduce total greenhouse gas emissions over their lifetime compared to gasoline vehicles in most regions of the world. They are not a silver bullet, but they are all cleaner overall, especially as power grids decarbonize, which means renewable energy sources become more prevalent than man-made power. Once that happens, EVs are even cleaner. Here's how I think about it. Gas cars burn fuel directly in your driveway. Millions upon millions of driveways, or in traffic with engines spitting out all kinds of crud. EVs centralize emissions at power plants. It's the difference between millions of tiny campfires versus a few giant regulated furnaces. Neither is zero impact, but one is definitely easier to control and clean up over time. And as clean renewable energy grows, EVs quietly improve without you having to change your car. That's kind of elegant and forward thinking. We didn't even touch on hydrogen cars. That's because hydrogen cars at least seem to have died on the vine. But in my dopey opinion, they were the perfect solution. Still zero emissions, no big battery debacle, no stress on the power grid. They just never really caught on, at least not yet, mostly because the infrastructure for refueling just isn't in place. I mean, the first question you ask when someone says, I'm thinking about getting a hydrogen car is, where are you going to get the fuel for it? Where is there a hydrogen station? Especially in rural areas. But until someone figures out solar-powered recharging, which they're working on, but it's definitely not there yet, hydrogen cars were a real monumental step toward cleaning up our atmosphere. More so, as most data shows, than electric. So I'm hoping they have their own comeback story, but I'm saddened by their disappearance.
And that's all I have to say about that.
All right, so we're whittling this down. Are electric vehicles making a difference? In creating this episode, a friend of mine asked me, what happens, let's say, if just the U.S. and Europe 100% switch to electric cars? Like, if it was a mandate, suddenly we all have to be in electric cars, okay? Let's anchor that in some real numbers. The IPCC says transport accounted for 23% of global energy-related CO2 emissions in 2019, which is their last year of data. 70% of that direct export, you know what? I'm going to stop right there. I am not going to anchor this in numbers, okay? You don't need all this. I'm throwing a lot of numbers and sciencey terms at you, and it defeats the purpose of what this show is about, which is making it easier to understand. So let's get down to the bullocks of this, okay? The US and Europe account for a little over a quarter of the global greenhouse gas emissions. That means the rest of the world accounts for the rest. And a lot of that is developing nations, okay? Developing nations, underdeveloped nations, third world countries. Those places rely a ton on the used vehicle market. And most of the used vehicle market is gas. There's not a lot yet of used electrics. Used electrics lose their value pretty quickly. And that's because the battery, even though it's recyclable, the battery in the car has a lifespan. So what you're expecting a third world country to do or a developing country to do is buy a used electric car, which would probably be more expensive. I don't have facts behind that, but probably be more expensive than gas used cars, then eventually have to replace the battery. That's nonsense. There's no way that that's going to happen. Okay. So the end all be all is if the US and Europe together decided tomorrow to go electric, it wouldn't make a dent. That's really depressing and sad, but it would not make a dent. And not that it matters, but there's also been some discussion that I've heard here and there about, Asia would stay gas anyway. That's not happening. The International Energy Agency reports that 95% of electric car sales in 2023 happened in China, Europe, and the US. All right? China is not some crazy monolith staying gas. China, in particular, is already one of the main arenas where electrification is happening on a massive scale, which is important because Asia is also a huge share of the vehicle market and manufacturing. But if you start talking about places like South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, so on and so forth, then we get into that used car problem. They can't readily switch. The cars aren't available. The grid reliability is horrible, intermittent power. So fueling a car with electricity is way harder. And in a lot of those developing nations, motorcycles and minibuses, and as I said, used cars, dominate the whole market. So really, to get into those markets, we're talking about electric 2- and 3-wheelers, buses, urban fleets, delivery vehicles, and charging at centralized depots just in a few places. Now, if you live in a country that's got an intermittent power grid, the last thing on your mind is charging your car. If you have the choice between charging your car or having power in your home, which are you going to choose? Electric cars aren't making the dent that at least I thought they were making, okay? The environment still is getting bombarded with CO2 and other greenhouse gases all the time, every day, and just switching to electric cars isn't going to do the job. All of that said, I'm definitely in the camp of every little bit helps, okay? Anytime you can support green initiatives, whether that's the power grid or whether that's electric vehicles or anything else, clean renewable energy, we should do it. We're kind of screwed right now. There's currently no end in sight to this problem, to global warming. And I can wax philosophic about all the issues that global warming actually causes. No one's going to listen anyway. But suffice it to say, we're not doing good. And I'd really hoped after 20 years plus or minus of electric cars being integrated into our society that there would be a notable change. There is not. So I'm going back to the US and Europe. If only the US and Europe electrify and others don't, we would still get a reduction in global transport CO2 relative to the sort of business as usual. But overall, the US and Europe electrifying has limited maximum impact. If large, fast-growing vehicle markets remain mostly internal combustion, global emission reductions really slow down. You also miss out on the massive public health win. I started this whole thing talking about air quality. There are places where urban pollution is out of control. So as bad as you think it might be here, there's other parts of the world that are bananas. So yes, if the US and Europe electrify, it does matter. But no, it doesn't finish the job because the growth is elsewhere. I'll give you a quick analogy because my brain only understands stuff when I do this. Imagine the world's transport emissions are a giant bathtub filling with water. The US and Europe turning to EVs is like turning down the faucet a whole lot. But if the other faucets are still on full blast and a couple new ones get installed, the bathtub still fills. So EVs are a good move, a necessary move, not the huge, massive earth-cleaning change we would hope for. Do with that what you will. So, what did we learn today, if anything? Gas cars undeniably contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. Electric cars are not impact-free. They put stress on the power grid, their battery production produces its own emissions, and currently power plants blast all kinds of crap into the atmosphere. But they are measurably cleaner over their full life cycle, especially as electricity generation improves. And they make a huge impact, thank the heavens, on noise pollution.
Why? Because I hate noise. Can't stand noise.
They are not making the impact on the environment that I anticipated. I can't speak for all of you, but my expectations have been dashed. So are they making a difference? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yeah, but not in a huge way. At least not yet. The perfect solution, as I see it, is car companies providing a solar generator along with the purchase of a car. Now we're talking about a genuine change in greenhouse gases. No big power plants coughing up even more toxic junk to keep up with the demand. No infrastructure issues. That would make an incredible difference. It wouldn't alleviate the battery issue, mining for batteries and so forth. But man, it would be a huge and meaningful leap forward. So think about that, car companies. All I ask is about 0.5% for the idea. I take checks. In my feeble mind, here's where that leaves us. Expecting a global switch to electric is ridiculous. Even an idiot like me understands that. As it stands, electric vehicles are more expensive and less available than gas vehicles. To expect people just in developed countries to be able to afford electric cars in short order is bananas, let alone third world and developing countries. If by some miracle the prices come down to something closer to gas vehicles, then the availability problem comes into play. Remember, just creating the battery alone is becoming harder and harder. We're running pretty low on the key ingredients for electric motors. Yes, new discoveries of lithium and rare earth elements happen here and there, but unless a lithium meteor the size of Spain suddenly drops into the ocean, right now we can't keep up. Then the strain on the power grid. Until the entire world is ready to switch to renewable energy, wind, solar, hydro, whatever, we can't all charge the damn things. Well, we can, but we wouldn't have power in our homes. Just a few people or a few thousand people or even a few million people switching doesn't really make a difference. And the largest culprits, aircraft, ships, commercial trucking, smoke-spewing commercial trains, essentially the shipping industry as a whole, have no immediate plans to switch on a mass scale to electric. In some ways, they're still offsetting any gains we're getting. Add that to the psychological part, the you can have my gas car when you pry it from under my cold dead butt, and the political aspects, right? Oil is big, absurdly big business. Governments like oil. Oil is one of the main parts of the global economy. You add those things, then the mere thought of switching over in any kind of short order is just a pipe dream. So, what are we doing here? Is it a waste of time and resources? I wish I had a definitive answer. As I've mentioned, I've always been in the category of every little bit helps. But maybe someone out there with an intellect bigger than mine, which is a very low bar, can reach out and let me know. But for now, all I have is this data. Once again, I am a massive believer in the impact of electric cars. If for no other reason, they make me feel like I'm in some futuristic sci-fi film. And they don't make so much freaking noise.
I hate noise.
But if I'm expecting everyone to play ball and or expecting a major reversal in the impact our stupid species has made on the environment, it seems I'm going to be consistently and massively disappointed. But still buy your electric cars. That does it for this time. I appreciate you listening. I hope you learned a little something, or at least got the wheels turning in your head. Think I'm an even bigger idiot than I claim to be? Want to tell me everything I got wrong? Have a cool topic you were always curious about? Well, drop us a line. Email us at hello@ruffandtumble.com. That's hello@ruff-n-tumble.com. Join me for another upcoming episode of Assume I'm an Idiot. I'm your pal JR. Catch you again soon.